Well, hello everyone. We're today doing another live interview for Navarra Confidencial. I'm Augusto Ornayolo Silva. I'm the Latin America correspondent for Navarra Confidencial, and I will be conducting this interview with these fine people. The topic for today is the European Union socialist? And we have as our guest Mr. Kai Weiss from the Austrian Economic Center and the Hayek Institute. We have Jakub Wozinski, and we have Casimir. I really have trouble with your surname because I don't understand the Polish. Can you repeat your surname, please, Casimiro?
I believe it's quite easy to spell. It's just Przeszowski.
It's not easy at all. All right. Thank you very much, Casimir. So we shall begin looking at some basics about the European Union. What's the European Union? What it was created for? What does it stands for today, and what is its underlying ideology? Because every political entity has some kind of ideology that drives its function. So for today, we're talking especially about the European Union. So we're gonna talk. Everyone will have its share at talking, and in the end, I'm gonna do a quick commentary to wrap every topic up. Right. Let's begin with Jakub. What do you know the European Union was created for?
Well, for me, the main purpose for the creation of the European Union, just after the World War II, was just to impose a new monetary system upon the whole Europe. There was the new Bretton Woods system, and there was some need for coordination of this new economic reality, and European Union was perfect because, well, first of all, there were some mechanisms placed just to ensure that the hegemony of the dollar would be imposed, and that worked fine for a long time. But later on, I think it was about 60s or 70s, the main European powers decided just to do something extra, to do something special about it, and they decided to go on their own. And in this way, step by step, year by year, a new idea of super state with a common currency was conceived, was created, and that's what actually happened around 1999. As far as I remember, there was this there was a treaty which enabled the creation of the euro, of the common currency. So that's my opinion. Yes, that European Union was initially created for mainly because of some needs to let's say rebuild the Europe after the demolition of the war. But later on, it developed into something totally different. And now we can say in the year 2020 that somehow it already succeeded. Yes, we have the common currency. We have now already common debt in place. So yeah, that's what's happening at the moment. So that's basically my answer to your question.
Right, thank you, Jakub. All right, same question for you, Kai. What do you think was the origin of the European Union? The true origin, not the historical one.
Yeah, so I think I have a different take to all of this than Jakub has. even though I agree with him that obviously what he said at the end, namely that it started out as one type of idea and it then became something else. I think that's very true. I think the reasons why something like the European Union was created after World War II, there are many different reasons, I think. But there was a collective shock of what has happened, what happened before, during the world wars. And I think there was very much an attempt, of course, to prevent that from happening again. There was a very realist notion to that. I think it's quite interesting if you read sort of the founding fathers. They were not very ideological often in the pursuit for more European integration. It was often, for instance, for countries like Belgium or the Netherlands, it was more like, we want to prevent, for instance, Germany of becoming strong again and invading us again and stuff like that. Or for Germany, for West Germany, it was more like, okay, we don't want to be bulldozed by the Soviet Union. So it kind of was that attempt to come together and sort of have this project of peace, as weird as it sounds at first, but I think to just kind of have a peaceful European Union, finally, or European continent that doesn't fight itself all the time. It's also interesting to note that all of the founding fathers were quite, when they had sort of opinions on policies, they were often influenced by Christian ideals. So if you look at Konrad Adenauer from Germany, Ludwig Erhard from Germany, if you look at Charles de Gaulle in the first few decades of the European Union, if you look at De Gasperi in Italy, those were very much influenced by Christian ideals, and they wanted to sort of pursue European integration from a Christian democratic standpoint, which is basically, okay, let's have peace, let's have free trade, sort of pro-market approach, and let's basically just have a European continent that follows these principles. As Jakub has noted, it then very quickly turned away from that. I mean, at least, especially during the 80s and 90s then, and what happened then in 1992, as Jakub has said, kind of turned everything around with the Maastricht Treaty and the introduction of the euro, which I think is something that many of the founding fathers would have been very much opposed. And so the European Union has turned into something very different over time than initially, because initially it was more of a union that was trying to pursue peace and free trade and voluntary interaction between different European countries. Also from a standpoint of self-interest, of wanting to protect your own country after what had happened in World War II. So I think that's kind of how I would answer the question of how the European Union or the European project in general came into being.
Right. Thank you, Kay. And finally with Casimir. So the question is pretty much the same. What do you think is the origin of the European Union? What do you think it was created for?
I would like to answer this question from the perspective of the speech which gave John Paul II at the European Parliament in the 1988. He, looking through the history of the European unity and history of Europe, which he has very profoundly studied, he pointed that it was a great seek of the unity of whole the continent, the great seek of the peace, as Kai mentioned, and as Jakub as well mentioned, the seek of the common economy, common marketplace, but as a sign of something more profound, something more based on the values. So, as he mentioned, because European Union, which we can see at the moment, was founded at in the historical stage when Europe was very roughly divided to the Western democratic part and in the Eastern communist part. It was to regain the unity which was forcibly, violently introduced by the Soviet Union, by its military forces, that he, from the point of view of the John Paul II, they were like two pullmans of the human organisms that the Europe needed to breathe with the two pullmans, and this vision of the even organic unity of the Europe, of the like something obvious, something necessary, as one of the signs of the unity of human nature, and as well as the specific of each culture of each nation, and as the multicultural image of Europe, like mosaic, with the unity, but with preserving the identity, the true nature of each piece, which makes this mosaic. So for me, the real roots were philosophical ones, and of course there were much of politics, as Kai mentioned, or much of economics, like Jakub mentioned, but as a deeper level of this phenomenon, for me, it was a long tradition of seeking European unity, which was represented by dozens of the councils, church councils, of course, but universal councils, which gathered in many times each century, I will say, and to the concept, getting back to the concept of the Christianity, which was something deeper than the superficial political divisions, but something which makes us all the people, and all the people in Europe in this case, being sons of the same God, having the same dignity as human beings. So for me, it was, I wouldn't say that it was necessary or obvious, it was not, but as a consequence, as Kai mentioned, as the demolition of the interhuman relationships during the Second World War, it was like to start from something basic, from the very bottom of the pyramid of the society, to start again. This is my point of view.
Yeah, and I do agree with all of you, because the European Union was founded on a purpose to promote peace among European nations, especially France and Germany, to promote free trade, especially in industrial commodities such as coal and steel, just to prevent war. There was a two-way concept in promoting both peace and free trade, and also because there was a sense of unity among Europeans since a long time, but that unity was lost to decades of war, such as the First World War and the Second World War. And in a sense, the European Union was meant to be a secularized version of Christianity, of the concept of the Christian imperium that prevailed in the Middle Ages. But as we've seen, the European Union today is nothing like it was meant to be at the beginning. So now I think the question would be, what do you think happened for the European Union to become the political leviathan in a bad sense? The political leviathan it has become a mockery of a super state, of a federal state that has shared currency, shared debts, shared migrant crises, and so on. So, I will begin with Kai.
Yeah, it's a good question of how that turned around. I mean, you still had sort of in the 70s, 80s, you still had politicians that were following that initial idea of the EU, that more free trade, free enterprise kind of vision. Obviously, I'm thinking very much of Margaret Thatcher, but she was always an outsider's perspective, even when she was in power. But even someone like de Gaulle, who had a very realistic vision of what the EU should be. It should be a community of nations coming together, sovereign nations coming together, working together, but still being sovereign nations, not basically being constrained on their sovereignty, that everything is being decided on a higher level in Brussels. It's a good, I would say that probably around the 80s or something like that, it turned into something else, probably because of the politicians that then came into power. From a German perspective, I'm immediately thinking of Helmut Kohl, the Chancellor of Germany back then, and one of the main drivers of, even though Germany obviously was very skeptical of it, but in the end, he signed on to the Maastricht Treaty. And all in all, I think there were already signs of that turning away from the initial vision of the EU back in the 80s. But with the Maastricht Treaty in 1992, it really changed, because you had the euro being implemented, or being decided to be implemented. But there were also a lot of other decisions that were made that very much also then in councils that happened afterwards throughout the 90s and early 2000s made the EU kind of, well, I wouldn't say undemocratic, but very much semi-pseudo-democratic in many regards when you look at what is happening in Brussels. But it's very difficult to hold anyone accountable of what is being done on the EU level. And so this has kind of just been worsening and worsening. And when we look at sort of the question that you were asking at the beginning of what kind of underlying ideology there is, I think the ideology is basically just that the more EU, in many ways, for many politicians in Brussels and around Europe, it's the more EU, the better. That's sort of the ideology that is often behind it. But we should never forget that that's not how it needs to be, and that, at least according to treaties as well, that it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, there is a case, like you have in the EU treaties, the subsidiarity principle. You have that concept of sovereignty of the national states. But so far, that is often very much neglected, and that's sort of how it has turned into the EU, sort of a centralizing, often protectionist, mercantilist force that just clamps down on freedoms and really tackles issues that are not really their task. That's sort of how it has turned around.
Thank you, Kai. Now I would like to hear what Casimir can tell us about how the European Union went from a secularized project for the unity of Europe, using trade and peace necessity to become the globalist force it is today.
Yes, European Union nowadays tends to take many sectors of the sovereignty which belongs naturally, unavoidably to the sovereign state and sovereign nation, because nation is a source of sovereignty. This is one of the thoughts of John Paul II. This year we have the 40th anniversary of the speech of John Paul II at the UNESCO headquarters in France, which is a real landmark milestone in the political cultural thought about Europe. So it should be very different, but nowadays European Union by its institutions, through its institutions like European Court of Human Rights, for example, it tries to impose different values which are not shared by the countries which become judged by this court. As a Center for Life and Family, we are focused on the defense of the human dignity and human life from its very conception to the very end. And sadly, we have to notice that at least 3 times a European Court of Human Rights, very differently from the initial thought of shared values, which builds the unity. It was the original idea of the Christianity, the spiritual value-based unity, which was transformed to the imposition of the controversial values. For example, what can be observed, that not especially literally the law is changed, but there is a new interpretation, new approach, new commentary to the basic fundamental laws which builds the unity of the Europe. And to the surprise, for example, the right to life, which is a basic human right, can be diminished by the right to for example, privacy. This is one of the interpretation given by the sadly majority of the judges of the European Court of Human Rights. So this process has started, I believe, in the 90s, and this is in the first place. It's like taking away the inborn rights of the nations. Someone instead of them tries to decide for them. And secondly, this is transforming the initial values. It's giving the new content, new ideological content of the principal values, which are basically Christian values, which built the nature, the spirit of Europe, which were named in this way by John Paul II in his remarkable speech to the European Parliament in 1988. So to summarize, I think that there is something very alarming, something very sad happening to the European community, which has driven away very far from its beginning, from its sources, and possibly the tensions which can be observed now in the European Union are the consequences of the way how we moved from the origin from the original concept of the European Union.
Thank you, Casimir. And now, well, I think Jakub can give us a different argument, a more economic one, on how we went from there to here with the European Union. What do you think happened?
Well, yeah, my argument will be, I think, also a bit cultural one, because for me, the whole idea of the European Union was a bit utopian from the very beginning. Of course, I don't want to simply say that all that you have said before about the Christian Democrat roots of the European Union is false, because I also believe that it also played some important role at the very beginnings of the European Union. But we also need to remember that the very idea that this new union will bring about a new kind of unity in Europe was, as I said, utopian. It was. We have to always remember what Europe looked like after the World War II. It was dominated by the Great Conflict, by the Cold War. There were American troops all around. Well, they still are. They still are in Europe. So in this way, this unity was, I would say, not so very much grounded in reality. So we had this new situation where this new unity was being built, but there were still some national interests. We cannot simply agree on a situation when there is a new unity. We create a union with a common market and all other things being common, but there are still national interests in the play, and that was completely forgotten about. I mean, in the process of the development of the European Union, there was this kind of new identity being proposed. At the moment, we are talking more about being a European than being just, let's say, a German or Spaniard or Italian. Yes, there is this new common identity being proposed or even forced upon. And for me, this situation is a bit risky because, well, when there is this kind of new identity, new common identity of the European man created, well, there was a need to find some new common enemies. Yes, and for me, the very important thing that is sometimes forgotten about was the revolution of the 60s. Yes, there was this new Marxist revolution or Marxist revolution in Western countries, and many of the politicians who took part actively in this revolution later on began they became very influential in Brussels and in the European Union. I remember politicians such as Daniel Cohn-Bendit or Joschka Fischer who were once at the very forefront of the revolution, and somehow this radical revolutions became the main currents of the European Union, and that's I think where the main crisis came from. Yes, that the radical ideas simply became the mainstream, and we've got results of this still in play at the moment. So I would like to also add one more thing. For me, very situation which was a big game changer was 1989. Yes, because after the fall of the communism, there was a new situation. Yes, that new independent countries appeared on the map of Europe, but something very important happened also in the West. There was the reunification of Germany, which suddenly became the biggest country with the biggest potential in Europe. So all that influenced Europe in a way that, I mean, it was no longer, it could no longer be the same union that it originally was just after the war. So I think basically just to say once again, my main point is that the idea of the European Union was a bit utopian, was not well prepared, and later on there was the revolution, and something really got out of control.
Thank you, Jacob. Well, I do agree with most of your points, especially with yours, Jacob, because even if The original idea of the European Union was very good. It was badly implemented, and it was a bit utopian, because Europe had already changed too much for a concept of a secularized Christianitas to arise again. So in the end, it would change into something very different very quickly, and I think that's what happened, because the European Union, as we know it today, is nothing like the original European communities. First of all, it has a lot of features that the European communities didn't have, and even the trade aspect of the European Union is becoming less important than it wasn't at the beginning. So we can say there are different entities in pretty much every sense. Anyway, the current aspects of the European Union seem to be very interesting, because some people are likening the European Union to a proto-socialist state, and this is the main topic of the webinar, that if the European Union is socialist or not. So I would like to talk about this particular point, because we're seeing that each time the European Union promotes a globalist point of view, pro-migration, pro-debt, and so on, it's becoming more and more similar to what the former Soviet Union used to be. So we can do some similars between the two. I would like to begin with Casimir.
Oh yeah, thanks. I can actually just quickly jump in, as we discussed on the chat. But so, I mean, for me, the question is really, when we look at the EU, and we say that the initial idea of it was utopian, I don't really understand how that is actually the case, because all the things that the EU stood for at the beginning has been a success. The goal was peace. We have, I mean, on some level, I mean, we don't have wars anymore. We do have peace now in Europe, and we've had it for 6 to 7 decades. The goal was free trade. We've had a common market for many, many decades, and at least for the first few decades, you've had the EU being one of the main forces for free trade and completing a lot of free trade agreements with other countries in the world. Just because it has turned away from that now doesn't mean that the initial idea wasn't good, or that it was utopian in a sense, because we never can really know what happens in a few decades' time. I mean, now for us, in our situation, in hindsight, it's easy for us to say, oh, well, we should have foreseen that from the beginning. But can we really foresee that? I mean, just as another example, I think, for instance, the US Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are great, even though what it has turned into now 250 years later is a little worrisome, as we see in the last 2 to 3 days. Does that mean that the founding fathers were utopian in thinking that they could have a pro-freedom regime in the US, for instance? I just don't really see how that is utopian in and of itself. And I just want to jump in on that. But now, go ahead with the actual question. Sorry.
Yeah, so I would have liked you to answer first the question, because we're seeing that the European Union is very impositive in some of its policies. So maybe you as a Polish, you can see if the European Union is pretty much becoming a new Soviet overlord, instead of becoming a trade community and a political community as it was supposed to be originally.
Is the question to me or Kazimierz?
First to Casimir, and then to you, Jacob. In the end, it's gonna be Kai.
Answering the question asked on the chat of the YouTube channel, well, maybe the Polish perspective is in that dimension is interesting, that communist regime in our country was overwhelmed. It was we gained them. We had a victory over the communist regime in the peaceful way, and this dream about freedom and unity with the rest of Europe was deeply in our souls through at least 2, if not 3 generations. And this spiritual unity, which we mentioned about previously, was something more important than the political, even economical circumstances. And maybe it's interesting point, but for all of you, especially in Latin America, we in Poland belong to Eastern Europe. I think that it's your point of view, but from our point of view, we are still Western Europe, and this division, which was very remarkably seen in Berlin, divided by the wall. Division was unnatural. It was interruption of the cultural, spiritual, economical bonds which unified Europe through centuries. It's not for example, it's not a coincidence that we share the same architectonical styles. We share thousands of same words, even some political concepts were and are quite the same. So it was a great community, and in Second World War and the Soviet epoch, it was just brief interruption of the 2000 years of the unity of European civilization. And another point of John Paul II about this topic is that the culture seems to be the most powerful factor of the history. Of course, we as a Christian, as a Catholics, we believe that God himself is the most important factor of the history, of course. But looking at the longer perspective on the economical, social processes, we can see that the human resources are very important factor in all processes, like in the Germany or Austria. The high level of these countries comes, of course, from the technical advances, but most important is the mentality of the Austrians, of the Germans, and this shows that the culture is very, very important. And we can see that these values, these Christian-rooted values, were still preserved, to the surprise, in the Soviet influence, Soviet-dominated Central and Eastern Europe, and the idea of getting back to the beginning, to the first step of the European unity, was the purpose for which John Paul II, knowing very well the crisis, the moral, spiritual, cultural crisis of the Western Europe, can be somehow fixed by the new, fresh blood of the Eastern Europe nations, which managed to preserve, because we were not devastated by the 68-year revolution, and this it was present in many speeches of John Paul II, that this unity, this coming back to the roots, getting back to the roots, is the mission of the Eastern, obviously in the economical, political, and other dimensions, less developed countries, but having still the values which are in the long perspective the most important factors of preserving the political, cultural entities. So it's so to make summary, the culture, the identity was victorious. Not the Soviet tanks, not the millions of Soviet soldiers, but the deep Christian-rooted culture, the seek for freedom, the freedom of the spirit. It was what made us gain over the communism, and these values were supposed to reinforce the original idea of the European Union. Another question is if this process is successful. It's a different question. Thank you.
Thank you, Kazimir. Now we're going to Jacob. Pretty much the same question. Do you think that nowadays the European Union is becoming more and more socialistic? Especially for you as a Pole, you can see that maybe the European Union is trying to become another Soviet overlord, trying to impose its will for the Polish people.
Well, yes, unfortunately, in some extent, I have to agree with you that this is a new kind of Soviet Union. Of course, we have to remember what the Soviet Union was. We have concentration camps, etc. But we have this kind of the same model of central planning at the moment. Yes, we have, for example, new directives being issued almost every month or every week, and they are centrally imposed upon. And the more actually is being said about the European unity and diversity among nations, the bigger number of regulations are being forced upon from the central seats of power. Yes, that's how we in Poland mostly look at Brussels. Yes, that's there is a great resemblance to what happened before 1989, where we had the communism in Poland, where there was, very much. There was every aspect of economical life was under control from the state. Of course, as I said, with the right proportions, it is much better at the moment. But still, there is a kind of similarity. For example, when we look at European funds, that seems quite evident to everybody who's involved in this. That there's that's a kind of waste of money, waste of capital. It all resembles big investments from the time of the social realism in Poland, where there were many similar situations where there were many big funds for big things, and this was announced with big pump, but later on it always turned out that, well, yes, the central planning doesn't work well. We have European Union which tries to control many aspects of life, which tries to decide what is the right size of cabbage and carrot and everything like that. We have new budgets, EU budgets, which are, as I said, quite similar to all the 5 and 10 years plan that we had under social realism. So yes, there are many similarities, and that is evident to everybody here. Of course, as I said, we need to look at it with the right proportion, but that's the main point. Yes, that the European Union at the moment seems to be in the process of quite dangerous centralization. If we look at the process of decision making at the highest level of the European Union, everything looks like that the biggest powers have bigger power than the small nations. And in this way, I would like to answer to Kai, yes, who didn't agree with me about the utopian about the utopian model of the European Union. When I said utopian, I meant mainly the fact that it was utopian from that European states that have their own national interests can really form a new union, new body, new political body without any conflicts, and that what was generally assumed. As I said, the situation was extraordinary at the time. Everybody was really happy to make some cooperation at the moment because, as I said, the whole continent was destroyed. But with the lapse of time, national interests really woke up, and we have them in full swing at the moment. The history didn't stop with the formation of the European Union. The national interests still exist, and that's what I meant by saying that the European Union was a bit utopian, because it was, as I said, it was a false idea to believe that this could happen for a longer time, that if we put into one union countries which are states which are big powers, and some small states, that the bigger countries really won't use that fact to impose their own political will upon the weaker ones. And that's what is currently happening at all EU summits. Yes, from the Polish perspective, as I already mentioned, it looks like the biggest players, the biggest countries, which are much more much richer than the countries from the new Europe, from the Eastern Europe. They simply impose their own will, and that is what is constantly happening all the time. And as I said, that's quite a dangerous process, which needs to be somehow avoided.
Thank you, Jakub. Well, now we'll wrap this round with Kai's intervention, and well, I think that for you it can be a little bit trickier than for Casimir or for Jakub, because you're German, and because you may seem to be a little bit better with the European Union than most of our Eastern European or the Mediterranean peoples are. And some other people might even say that it's Brussels, Frankfurt, and Berlin that are dictating the European Union's politics and economics. So, do you think the European Union is becoming socialist? That's the question in a sense.
Well, I was already thinking after my comments before that I'm sounding strangely pro-EU in this discussion, which I never thought would happen. But I think saying that Germany, for instance, is dictating what the EU does is not really true. I often have the feeling, maybe that's a German feeling in general, but I have the feeling that France is often much more powerful because they can basically coordinate stuff with other major countries that they share interests with, like Italy, like Spain, like also Greece. Whereas Germany is often all by itself, somewhere stuck in between. So it often may seem like Germany makes a lot of decisions, but I think it's often more of a compromise. They are kind of in the middle, compromising the very extreme positions on both sides. I also don't really think that there's no way for smaller states to do something against bigger countries. If you look, for instance, at the Frugal Four, or Frugal Five, or however you want to call them, the Netherlands, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and Austria, right? Austria was the fifth one. How they actually got something, not a lot, sadly enough, but they actually got something done positive at previous council meetings. Also, I mean, Hungary, Poland, there's a reason, for instance, why the whole conditionality, like have funding conditioned on rule of law issues, why that is so very difficult to implement, because Hungary and Poland can just say no thank you. And that's very easy in a sense. So it's not like, I don't know, bigger countries are like small little dictators judging upon they are judging upon other nations, and that's a problem. But they can't really do a lot if the other nations don't participate in it. Now, to answer your actual question, is the European Union socialist? I will again sound weirdly pro-EU, which I have never done in my life, so I'm really shocked. But I don't think that the EU is socialist. I think that goes way too far. Like most other governments around the West at the moment, the EU is very similar in that it is very regulative, it's very corporatist, it's in many regards very protectionist, and there's not really much of political accountability. Now, all of those are similarities, for instance, to the Soviet Union, but that doesn't make the EU the Soviet Union. As Jakub said, the Soviet Union had concentration camps, they had many, many millions of deaths. That's something that the EU, I'm pretty sure, will never do. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm right. I almost said I hope I'm wrong, but I hope I'm right. I don't see that happening. It's basically only, and that's bad enough, but it's only a technocratic elite in Brussels trying again and again to take on more and more powers. But we don't need to give them the powers, and I hope that there will be a change in the coming decades. If not, I think the EU will break apart sooner or later. But I hope that there will be more decentralization and that there will be sort of more of a vision of, say, something like a Hanseatic League 2.0, or maybe something more like what Margaret Thatcher or de Gaulle, or also someone like Pope John Paul II had in mind, of sovereign nations coming together peacefully, cooperating with one another. It worked for a while. And then obviously the centralizing forces came into play again, but I think that's not, we don't need to go down that path constantly. And I think especially after all of the coronavirus stuff has gone, I think we will see a lot of realignments that may change that into a better position. So now I'm double shocked. I'm defending the EU, and I'm also slightly optimistic. I hope that's a good way to end my comment here.
Yeah, well, I do think that I can see some common points in here, that really the problem with the European Union isn't that much a socialistic approach from its leaders, which they are not, but more a centralizing approach from them. They want to have more and more power, more and more control, and they are using the European Union to achieve that goal. They are not socialistic by themselves, but they are trying to gain more control and using centralization as a tool to do so. As every politician tries to do, actually. Power tends to corrupt, and the more power they have, the more corrupt they will get. That's trying to quote Lord Acton. There are some few questions in the live chat, so I might read them for you to talk about them. The first one was, could you speak about the anti-communism law in Poland and how to implement it in other countries? And there was a similar question in there. I think, I don't know. I knew that there were some anti-communism laws in some other countries, such as in Serbia, in South Korea, but I think the Polish case is one of the most known. This one is for Jakub and for Kazimir. You can, yeah, go on.
Well, yes, I mean, the anti-communist law is, as far as I know, I'm not a lawyer and not a specialist in constitutional law and etc. But as far as I know, it is still in place. It is still in force. It is forbidden to propagate the communist ideology. However, I think that this law, in fact, at the moment is hardly ever used, because communism is still completely, I mean, as an idea, it is a dead idea in Poland, in the way that it was for all the Polish people. It is just it is similar to the old times, which were very unhappy to Poland. So nobody really thinks about promoting communism at the moment. We have like left-wing parties, but as I said, yes, this law is in effect simply socially, because nobody really thinks about coming back to the previous state. So even without that law at the moment, we could simply do without that.
Thank you, Jacob. Now I think Casimir can tell us a little bit more about this anti-communism law.
Yes, we had several stages of decommunization of Poland. Maybe we share some experiences with the Eastern Germans. The main difference is that our movement started in 1980, 2 years after election, in 1 year after the pilgrimage of John Paul II to Poland. We managed to break the political monopole of the Communist Party, registering this is something unique in the history of the world, in the 36 million country. We registered a political movement, which counted with 10 million members. It was like 60% of the adult citizens of Poland. So it was the first stage. So the visit of the Pope, then the 1980, it was the solidarity movement. It may be your favorite word from Polish. It's solidarność. I believe you would like it. So then in 1989, after 9 years of some kind of in Spanish it's called empate, it's like path situation, and two additional visits of John Paul II in 1983 and 1987. In 1989, way before the demolition of the Berlin Wall, in June we managed to organize first half democratic, semi-democratic elections, and it was the first step of the decommunization. Then, in 1991, we reorganized the self-government decree, and it was the moment when the self-governments started to decommunize the names of the streets, for example. And 1991, after or 1992, I'm not very sure about the year, the Communist Party auto-dissolved itself. It was the quite iconic phrase, "Take away the flags of the Communist Party." And what can be quite funny for you from the other parts of the world, our communists, they went to bed as communists and they wake up as social democrats, which is quite contrary in its principles. But it was the case of Polish left wing, that they were ex-communist for many years. So after that, after gaining in the presidential elections, we started to decommunize the law system, and about the anti-communist law, because it changing the names, there were several decrees which can be in common called the anti-communist law. One which I believe is the most crucial is the point 256 of the chapter 256 of the Penal Code of Poland. It is strictly, which says it is strictly forbidden to promote a fascist, communist, or other totalitarian ideology. So in our case, I believe it was easier to forbid the promotion of these ideologies, that there we had still, let's say, open graves, we had still millions of people who would suffer directly from the hands of the communist oppressors. So maybe it's not that easy in in other places which haven't suffered from that. And I will end up with the Polish joke that when we see so many pro-socialist or even pro-communist tendencies in the Western Europe, we say that let God damn you to the 2 weeks of communism, and you will become cured of your pro-communist tendencies. So I believe that the best way to become anti-communist is to leave it, to live several times in the communist regime. You still have opportunity if you want. You've got Belarusia, you've got Russia, you've got China, and you've got North Korea. You can decide wherever you want to go and to see that communism doesn't work. And it's not easy, and it's not human, the treatment they give to its citizens. So this is our experience, our way to get out from the communism. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Casimir. Yeah, so there are some few more comments that can be useful. Yeah, this one is the EU idea was implemented to avoid Europeans to get killed by themselves, the continent of wars. I think this one's for you, Kai, because that was pretty much your perspective on the origin of the European Union. I do agree. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very blunt statement, but I can agree with it. No, I think it was definitely an important point. It was not the only reason, but it was one of the main reasons. And again, I think if you look at what leaders of European countries back then thought and said and wrote, it was very clear and evident that there was, needless to say, a lot of anxiety after World War II that something like that could happen again, that your own country could perish because of the Soviet Union, because of Germany or some other regime. And so it was, in many regards, especially for smaller countries, smaller founding members, it was important to sort of safeguard themselves from something like that happening again. And so that whole security peace element is extremely important.
Right. There is another question in which they say the USSR, he's trying to make a similarity between the European Union, and the Soviet Union, stressing countries like Poland with the imposition of LGBT issues, abortion, and multiculturalism. This one's for Casimir and for Jakub. I think that Casimir can answer, can comment this first.
Yes, as we mentioned, European Union, especially by the European Court of Human Rights, is imposing us as the pro-abortionist law, which is nowadays, which become very different from our constitutional order, because I believe you know that from 22nd of October was declared unconstitutional the admissibility of abortion in the case of possible defect of possible severe disease of child child in the womb of its mother. So yes, this we suffer, especially the Center and Life for Life and Family. We organize marches for life and family to defend our values, the values shared by the great majority of our country, believe it or not, but very liberal pro-leftist foundation NGO conducted a survey asking, are you pro-choice or pro-life? And guess what answered the 75% of polls? We are pro-life. So this is very different approach of Polish nation about the principal values. So yes, we are we feel invaded. We feel great pressure from the European Union institutions, and we believe that we have survived the 123 years when our country hasn't existed, but our nation survived. We have survived from the Second World War, we have survived from the Soviet domination, and we believe that we survive the ideological pressure conducted by leftist taken institutions of the European Union.
Well, I think Jakub can do another comment on this.
Well, yes, that's what I fear as well. I don't remember the exact comment, but in fact that's what's happening. Yes, that let's say Brussels or the European Union is trying to impose upon us this kind of, as I say, false values of the LGBT movement, etc. For me, our traditional values here in Poland is really, they are really one of our greatest assets. Yes, this is our huge capital, because under communism, Poland really was a poor country. Yes, we couldn't really enrich ourselves. We couldn't build our economy, but we only had our values, and that's what survived the years of communism, and that is what is still a great asset in the current world, that we have these traditional values, and all these traditional values simply disappear step by step in the Western world, and there is a triumph of extremism, of left-wing extremism. We've got Islamic terrorism, which we witnessed yesterday by the attacks in Viena. The European states, well, living in European states becomes even more and more hard for ordinary people. Yes, because apart from the threats from the Muslim minorities and well, there are many other extremism ravaging throughout Europe, and many people simply, I think, long to the past where life was still quite usual. There were no such extremism, and this is a huge asset in hands of Poland and many other European countries. I know that many people from let's say Germany and even France try to move to Hungary, even there, because they feel that life is still much better for them in these countries, even though they are poorer. But still, life is much better for them, because they simply try to avoid all these kinds of extremism, and that's a huge asset. So that also makes me really worried about what is happening at the moment at the level of the European Union, because if we look at what is currently happening, if we look at the address that was made by Ursula von der Leyen, where she openly endorsed the LGBT movement agenda and other movements similar to this, this really made a really huge change in the process of European integration, because as we said originally, European Union was more about economic integration, but now it is more and more becoming like a superpower, super state trying to impose some kind of values upon member states, and this is quite this is quite horrifying for many people here.
Thank you, Jacob. Well, I think that we've talked a lot about the European Union, about its current problems, its current issues, and the way it could be better if it has any possibility to do so, or if it is actually part of the problem. So it's been great talking to you guys. I would really like to thank you, Casimir, Jacob, and Kai for being here today in the program, and I hope to see you again in the program soon.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you very much.